Coming up, we have Dan Makoski. Dan Makoski is the VP of Design here at Capital One. Many of us know him as our lead pirate, and he'll explain what that means, I'm sure. He works out of our San Francisco office, previously involved with the Google ATAP group. He's led design and research for many projects, the Moto X, Moto Skip, Razor, Mac Office, Microsoft Surface, and many other things. And he's here to share some of his wisdom and thoughts with you all.
Cool, awesome. All right, good morning. I'm really happy to be here. I love Android, and contrary to popular belief, I'm not actually the model for this version of Series 4 of the hipster / tracksuit wearing guy. But I did used to work at Google, and actually there was an article written about my departure from Google to Capital One, and it kind of went viral. And I don't think it's because I'm particularly interesting or awesome. I think what was really happening in most people's minds were, you have this guy who's at one of the world's most admired companies, free food, subsidized massages, colorful Google bikes in Mountain View, and he left all of that to go to a bank? I think it was kind of a WTF moment. And I think people were thinking either this guy is a little crazy or there's something interesting happening in the whole finance world. And I think the truth is it's kind of both. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that journey. And it's interesting though, I'm continually berated on social media for this decision. So this is a tweet I got recently. And what I really like about this is that most people don't know that the mission of Capital One is to change banking for good. And so this is this idea that don't go to a bank, you're just gonna suck everyone dry. Like I love that kind of that conflict, that there really is something interesting happening here. Okay, so I've been here for just over a year. My team has been working for about 7 months on something, and we're kind of in the third trimester of our development stage, so I can't really quite show you. It's a little bit of an awkward stage, actually, because we're not quite sure exactly what we're going to bring into the world, and we can't quite talk about it yet. But anyone know the story about this guy? This guy, he and his wife had a maternity photographer coming to their house, and she freaked out at the last minute, I don't want to take pictures naked. He's like, well, I'm going to do the maternity photos instead. So he has a whole series of his own maternity photos. So it's pretty awesome. Okay, listen, so I'm just going to talk about two things today. And actually, raise your hand if you've heard me talk at Capital One before. Okay, so what you're about to hear is exactly the same thing you've heard me talk about before. So apologies to those that this is a repeat. If you want to just take a nap, take a walk, check email, I'm totally fine with that. The reality is I'm actually not a Capital One speaker. I'm building products with teams, and so I don't actually have a lot of time to kind of update my content. So apologies in advance to you guys. So the two things, one thing is a little bit about my journey, how I got into this space of design and open design. And then the second thing is a little taste of what I'm doing at Capital One. And I think the reason why I'm here is because I've worked on a pretty popular Android hardware project, but I think fundamentally I want to encourage all of you guys to embrace the power of open. And we know the power of open from a technical perspective, open source, open app development, open standards, but there's a corresponding power of design and the way that we interact with people to have that same level of extreme openness. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so thing number one, let me start on my birthday. This was 41 years ago, and I love this expression on my mom's face. It always gives me comfort. And then I look at this expression on my mom's face and I realize that I grew up with a mom who's a little bit of a crazy actress. This is her in Dracula. And my dad is a graphic designer. And so you can see evidence of the craziness of my childhood. It kind of sucked because we were always poor, having two artist parents. But it was kind of exciting because we got a chance, my sister and I, to build and to create and make with freedom. So they bought shower boards from a local hardware store and put those up in a room where my sister and I could just create with complete freedom. And some of you might think this is why I went into design, right? Two artistic creative parents. And we're going to do a quick activity together to prove to you guys that actually we're all creative. And I think that's the first thing to recognize with open design, is that we are all creative. So I see these little awesomely logoed sketchbooks all around. If you can rip out a page or two, if everyone can just get a piece of paper and something to draw with. We're just going to do a quick little sketching activity together. Okay, so this is the part where some of you developer introverts are starting to cringe, like, oh crap, a creative icebreaker. I think I have to use the bathroom. I promise, this is really simple. 60 seconds, this is a simple task. What I want you to do is look at somebody next to you, and I want you to draw a picture of them. Yeah? 60 seconds. On your mark, get set, go. All right. Final seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right, went classic on the alarm there. Okay, now, give your drawing to the person who it's of. Okay, now hold these up for me. I'm going to do a panoramic photo. I want to see all these photos. You guys ready? Try to stay still on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, hold those up. We're coming around the room. Hold those up. Some of you are going to be super blurry. That's okay. Okay, awesome. So what you guys just did was actually an experiment that was done by this guy on the left, Bob McKim. Bob McKim was at Stanford. He was one of the first engineers who were starting to think about how the power of design and creativity helps to solve engineering problems. And he became one of the world's first creativity researchers. And he did this activity with all kinds of people, dozens of groups, kids, families, parents, and adults. And whenever he did this with adults, what just happens every time, right? There was a little bit of a kind of a collective gasp of like nervousness at the beginning. And then there was, I walked around and I probably heard maybe 6 or 7 kind of sorries already. Like it was, I don't know, it was someone like, I apologize in advance. And then, you know, there's all of this kind of laughter that comes when we share these drawings. Now, when you do this with kids, I know a lot of you know this already, but for those that don't know, what do you think happens when you do this with kids, especially primary school age? Any guesses? They take it very seriously. Any other thoughts?
No apologies.
They just start drawing, no apologies. Yeah. There's no particular fear, there's no particular joy. It's just, that's what we do. We're human beings. We create, we make. You give any kid crayons and some paper, they'll just start making and drawing. And there's no fear. And so Bob did this activity to prove that human beings have this innate skill of being creative, and that something happens as we get into the middle school, you know, hormone like body odor kind of stage of life where we start really caring about other people's perceptions of us, where we start to fear the judgment of our peers. And so to me, my call to you guys is to go back to that childlike state of openness, whether it's your code or your ideas or conversations in meetings. Let go of that fear of failure and some awesome things could happen. And actually there's a fantastic book about this called Creative Confidence. This is written by the founders of IDEO. So whether or not you're a designer, developer, or just want to exercise that muscle, this is a great book to learn more. Okay, so back to my story. So I was working at Google, and I was working at Google for a badass, Regina Dugan. She was the former director of DARPA, which I didn't know anything about DARPA, but I guess that's the US military's advanced research labs. And when I found that out and I met with her, I was like, I'm not gonna piss this woman off, because there's probably a drone waiting somewhere. But Google hired her to lead hardware innovation after they bought Motorola, and her goal was to create a small band of pirates that was trying to do epic shit. That was their motto. And when I was at Capital One, this is our intranet site, the old version of it, and there's this place where you fill out your expertise. And so I put, instead of Photoshop or design, I said doing epic shit, which, the week later, my manager's like, hey, Dan, there's been some comments. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, it's really that appropriate for an executive to be using such crass language. And then 20 minutes later, I got an invite from this guy, Jory, who's the head of HR for all of Capital One. I was like, crap, that was a quick experiment. And so I meet with Jory. He doesn't talk about any of the shit stuff. And at the end, I said, hey, did you know about that shit thing? He's like, yeah, that came all the way to me. I was like, oh, man, that's crazy. What do you think? He's like, well, you might want to put a link to why you talk about that. So now there's actually a link that goes to this story. And I'll talk to you about why I think that's appropriate in a Capital One environment in a second. But the way that Regina got teams to do epic shit was to have people answer the question, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Which is kind of like the adult version of that drawing activity you just did, right? Let go of the fear of failure, what could happen? My answer to that question was, I want to make hardware a lot more like software. Because when I was at Motorola, I would have dozens of people come to me throughout the year with innovative hardware sensors or capabilities and say, I want to get this thing in a phone. I'd say, that's awesome, but none of those would ever really make it into the phone, right? You'd have to convince Apple or Samsung or Motorola to kind of get into that space. It wasn't as open as software. And so we created the very first idea of this kind of open hardware platform by taking a yo-yo board. And raise your hand if you know what the yo-yo board is. Okay, so this is basically like an Arduino controller for Android. This is written by Itai out of Google X. And as soon as we pop this into the phone, developers can now have full access to the capabilities of the phone. And we decided to create this hardware development kit, because unlike an SDK, which you can just download in midnight in your pajamas, when you have a hardware development kit, you need to bring physical atoms to developers. And this was actually our first version. This is a Sprinter van covered in 4,000 linear feet of Velcro, because Velcro is awesome. And it's also the ultimate symbol of open hardware. You stick anything to it, you move it around. And we had $250,000 worth of laser cutters, 3D printers, hackable electronics, and we drove across the country and brought this HDK to ordinary people, to engineers, and to designers to see what they would make. The first weekend, actually this is in the middle of the tour, teams would cover the truck with ideas of what they wanted hardware to do, and then in a day they would build it. And the first weekend at Caltech, with some art center students, these guys took a work glove and put in flex sensors and capacitive pads, and had a glove that was translating American Sign Language into text messages so that the deaf could communicate with anyone really easily. And it was kind of interesting to us because it's something we wouldn't have thought about to do, but it showed us the power of this kind of platform. And we saw dozens of examples of this. We said if students in a day using such a hacked together platform could create such amazing ideas, we need a proper platform for the whole world to make in hardware. And that became what's now called Project Ara, right? This is if Lego and a smartphone had unprotected sex. This would be their love child. It's a hardware platform where you can choose any kind of size frame. You can change the capabilities anytime. If you're like an application processor junkie that's like, oh man, I just, 3 months after you buy your new phone, a new faster processor comes up, why not just swap that in? At the end of the day, if your battery's dead, swap a new one in. If you're going on vacation, pop in a $200 camera module, right? There's all kinds of possibilities that are available. And when we announced this a couple years ago, we actually invited the world to continue designing with us. In the first 24 hours, these were the posts from around the world of all kinds of stuff, like fan art. We had, RF engineers telling us how to make, modular antennas. And we actually had everyone make their own phone, the right width and height. And the actual engineering decision about width and height of these 3 frames we ended up creating was crowdsourced from 34,000 measurements around the world. So this, to me, I really feel like these are the profile pictures of those people from around the world, and they were really a part of the team. And so whatever you're doing, whether you're at a corporation or a startup or somewhere in between, I invite you to find ways to involve the voices, hopes, and dreams and ideas of everyday people in your process. So I want to actually show the power of making really quickly with a second and last cringeable design activity. And this is going to involve Play-Doh. So you all have Play-Doh at your tables. If you can take this out, this is just kind of like a tangible tool you can use in your process. Now while I give you some time to get this out, does anyone know what Play-Doh was called before it was Play-Doh? No. It's a good guess. It was Kutal, of course, which I was giving this talk in Amsterdam, and I guess this is like a derivative of a word that means female genitalia. And in front of the audience, I'm like, Kutal! And everyone's like, holy shit! And I was like, they're loving my talk! So in addition to that, Kutal was actually wall cleaner. At the turn of the century of coal-burning stoves leaving soot on the walls, you would use this putty and rub the soot off, right? The company was about to go out of business because as you move to gas and electric, you don't need soot on your walls. And one of the founders of Kutal saw that a local school teacher was using this wall cleaner, putting food coloring drops in it, and turning it into modeling clay in her classroom. And when he saw that, he said, this is how people actually use my product. This is a much better use of this stuff. So he created Play-Doh, right? And that's how this was created. So we're going to use Play-Doh for another 60-second activity. I want you to design a toothbrush from the future. You have 60 seconds. You can do anything you want. Some of you have done this before. Design a toothbrush from the future. It can do anything. You guys ready? Your mark. Get set. Go. Okay. Okay, awesome. Anyone want to share their toothbrush from the future? I'm not going to pick on you because you were done in a second. What do you have here?
This little tiny thing, so it's going to have crystals on it. You just put in the mouth and rinse it. That should do the job. So.
That's awesome. How many of you guys did little dot nano candy-based kind of things? Yeah, super cool. I could totally get my kids to brush their teeth if it was like just chewing some gum or having some nano bristles Roomba in their mouth. That's awesome. Okay, who else wants to share a toothbrush creation? Anyone over here from the future? Yeah, some hands over here? All right.
So this is just a mouthpiece. They can put it in clay. Probably ready to move on.
Yeah, this is brilliant. Now, tell me the truth. Did you bite into your Play-Doh to prototype? A little bit, yeah, that's great. Don't touch that Play-Doh afterwards. No, but that's great. Why take one surface to all four surfaces? Why not just chew a couple of times, right? That's great. How many of you guys did like roundy, mouth guardy kind of things? Yeah, awesome. That's great. Who else wants, yeah, there's a hand over here, yeah.
Just a little thing you slip on your finger. Not going to demonstrate for real.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. That brings to mind all other kinds of ideas. That's great. That's great. Yeah. I wanted you guys to do this to demonstrate. You had no briefing. You had 60 seconds. And the ideas that I heard are just pretty epic. And I think that if we had actually cataloged all of these, you'd see a qualitative difference than if you had actually done this in just whiteboarding or writing. There's something different that happens when you make, when you create, when you form. I think you operate a different part of your brain and a different part of your being. So I encourage you guys, as you're developing your apps, to get into that uncomfortable zone of creating. And more importantly, invite the people who you're designing for into a process where they're creating. Okay, so I'm gonna actually kind of wrap up here and talk a little bit. So Project Aura, by the way, is still in the shipping process. The first version will be coming out, I think, in the next kind of quarter or two to the first pilot participants. But my 2 years was up with that group, and I thought I'd work at Google or at Apple or at Samsung, and I just never, ever thought that I would come here, because this is how I view banking, right? Bunch of greedy bastards trying to suck people's money dry, right? But then I went to an open house event in San Francisco. I saw this space. And at Google, I did a search about money, and there's this autocomplete feature which allows you to understand from a data perspective the human conversation happening around finances, and these are the terms when you look at finances are. And this is why I feel it was important for me and my team to do epic shit here, because when finances are destroying people's relationships, the appropriate response is not just small incremental improvements in the experience. You have to really have a sense of urgency to do something really important. And our principles are to bring ingenuity, simplicity, and humanity to banking and to change banking for good. So anyway, so this is a better movie reference. And for those that are millennials that don't know, don't watch black and white films. This is It's a Wonderful Life, which is a much better model. So just thing number 2 as I wrap up, I'm part of this larger group that we call ourselves digital, which honestly sounds a little bit weird. I was talking to our friend, you'll hear him after me, who's actually from Google now. And we're like, can you imagine being in the digital group of Google? Like, I work in Google Digital. Oh, I'm in Google Analog. Yeah, like it's just technology and design and tech, it should be everywhere, right? But right now we're at a stage where we're bringing that together. And I actually have 4 teams that I work on the design. The design teams report up to me. These are actually my teams. And one of the things you're going to hear about today is something called the wallet and some of their work. This is the first version of the wallet and moving that to Android. I had a team in Chicago working in the partnership space. So Neiman Marcus and Kohl's and those guys, their financial backend is powered by Capital One. It gives us a chance to experiment. And then a little San Francisco team that's exploring future transaction ideas based on your past transactions. And then the last team, whose t-shirt I'm wearing today, we call ourselves the Design Pirates. And what we're trying to do is take this DARPA model of moving really fast with ambitious goals, with complete independence. And by the way, there's a great article, Harvard Business Review, the Special Forces Model of Innovation, about how that DARPA model works, but bringing a human perspective into that. So again, I can't actually tell you what is happening inside the 3rd trimester. It's a little bit secret right now, and we don't even know exactly what it'll look like. But let me give you a taste of what this team is trying to do, and then I will turn it over to our friend from Google. One thing you guys should know, so this is the initial team, the pirate team, and we actually brought in this guy, Jonathan Castro, who is a filmmaker. And he actually usually films like folks like Skrillex and Avicii and Deadmau5. And he just, we just said, why don't you just join our team and help us document the story so we can actually get engagement from folks across the organization. So he's kind of started this narrative that we call the improbable bankers, because none of us were bankers, and we're trying to do something improbable. And this is kind of a little bit of our journey, and then we'll wrap it up.
So today, basically, we are sort of sharing the insights about our research.
I gotta be honest, I never ever thought I'd work within banking. But a designer solves problems for people. And when I looked at the relationship that we have with money, how confusing it is and how dysfunctional it is, I felt that this would be an amazing place to heal that relationship.
Setting up some hypotheses about what problems people are really having, getting down to what are their daily lives and what do those things actually look like, trying to find those little needle insights about like where we could push just the littlest bit of change to make a big impact, and finally turning those into product concepts.
We used a method called paper storming, where in 15 minutes the team generated over 100 ideas about how we can improve people's lives.
Today, we set up a space in Capital One Cafe in downtown San Francisco, and we created a co-designing, co-creation space. We got our Capital One Cafe customers come in and share their view about their finances and how they are managing their money, their dream financial solution through creative exercises. So we learned a lot about, sort of their challenges in their day-to-day life. Another thing, we did a creative exercise around if your finance is a person, what does he or she looks like? And it was quite interesting how they were perceiving the way in which they manage their money and their financial situation. And lots of people talked about how conservative they are, or how ragged their person look like. So we think that these creative sessions are really important ways for us to get inspired and also to get sort of understanding of people's world. It's just the way that you don't get constrained in the way that things are supposed to be or what banks should be doing. That's why this is important and also a very inspiring way of understanding people's world.
I just feel like what our team is doing, it goes far beyond the confines of this small group of people. I mean, our story is really one about Capital One finding its potential through inspired design and through understanding the lives of people. So I'm most excited about being part of this larger group of 40,000 plus associates who are trying to do the right thing in an industry that nobody really trusts and nobody really understands. And that's pretty exciting.
All right, guys, so just a little taste at the third trimester. If you want to reach out to me, we don't have any time for questions, we got to move along, but feel free to reach out to me anytime. And if you're ever in San Francisco and want to connect with my team or just have a conversation over coffee, please reach out. And I encourage you guys to really have this open idea of prototyping really quickly. And one of the most powerful things about Android, it's so much easier and faster to prototype, in my experience, than on any other platform. And so I love the marriage of these technical tools with the ideas and creativity that comes from open design. So I encourage you guys as you go through the design of the development tracks today to think about how you can accelerate your creativity and your innovation. Thank you so much for the time, guys. I appreciate it.